This is ANN7 Prime. Thank you for joining us. My name is Audrey Chimwanda. We're coming to you live from our Midrand studios here in Johannesburg. In our top story, parents could soon get some relief from the high price of school uniforms. This as the Competition Commission is finalizing its probe into anti-competitive behavior that is in the sector. ANN7 reporter Hlengiwe Motang has the story.
The days of parents having to buy school uniforms from a single school-nominated supplier could soon vanish. This as the Competition Commission is finalizing its probe into anti-competitive behavior in the sector.
It's very good that we have this dialogue. This is the first dialogue that brings together all these stakeholders for these things to be discussed. And our worry about these long-term persistent contracts is that they lead to higher prices and they exclude other potential suppliers from participating in markets.
However, suppliers believe they are justified in charging high prices.
The only reason that increases the price of the uniform is that we pay rent to our landlords. We have to cover up costs for storing the uniform throughout the year in a warehouse, paying security for that. Also taking into consideration that some rejects might occur. Parents may return it after damaging it or changing schools after a week. That too also theft in the store or in the warehouse, fire. There's a lot of elements that we need to cover up costs for that increases the price of the uniform.
The investigation followed complaints about the high price of school uniforms.
Most parents have been coming to me to say uniforms are completely unaffordable. The old cartels, which, as I say, I came across when I was MEC trying to get into the VAL market, are still alive.
Stakeholders still believe there's a need for uniforms in schools.
Uniform was easy to dress during the week, no competition between students, lesser classification of students by class, it's easy to wear, less chance of children scrutinizing each other about what is considered fashionable and trendy. Oneness, equalness, equality. Uniform sets the standard for dress code, professionalism.
The Commission has now warned of possible prosecutions. This if the department does not act to rid the sector of these monopolies. Hlengiwe Motang, ANN7, Johannesburg.
And we'll discuss this further in studio. You're at home. Welcome to join in the conversation. Our phone lines are open. Our phone number is 011-542 and 1222. In studio, I have with me from the Basic Education spokesman, Troy Martins. We also have Xolani Fakude, Secretariat Officer for SATU, that's South African Democratic Teachers Union. On the phone line, we'll also be joined by Matakanya from the National Association of School Governing Bodies. You can also join us on our Twitter handle at ANN70. We'd love to hear from you. The expenses of going back to school, has this been the biggest kept secret in years? I know the Competition Commission has been at it since 2015, and it appears there's some kind of collusion. Perhaps we'll start with you, Xolani.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we have noted clearly that there definitely are very, very strong elements of anti-competitive behavior. Because you see, in our view, we have always said as such that education by its very nature should not be used as according to the logic of profit maximization. And right now what we are seeing with what we call the uniforms cartels is precisely that. It is again the logic of profit maximization. But now the problem with that becomes when you entirely ignore all other regulations that normally regulate how we procure. I mean, we still are speaking of evergreen contracts, for instance, whereby a school would go into a long-term, unending contract with particular suppliers, and then from there onwards, you've got other incidences whereby you find a situation whereby the last circular on this matter that was released by the Department of Basic Education in 2016 is not at all being implemented by schools. And we're saying that perhaps the SGBs must also come into the picture and take charge of the schools, because it directly affects accessibility to education as well.
Right.
You know, uniform is all about equalizing the environment. But now when you get a situation whereby it is in itself so exorbitant in terms of prices that it becomes an issue of elitism. It is about who can afford and who cannot. I mean, then it becomes becomes a huge problem.
Yeah. And it brings the question if schools are also complicit when it comes to this, because I understand they tell you specific stockists or outlets to go to when you want to look for a school uniform. School governing bodies, of course, have some kind of say in it when it comes to the evergreen contracts that you're speaking of. We're hoping to get Competition Commission to hear how far the research has gone with the investigations that they have been into. Hopefully we'll get a hold of them. Just coming to you, Troy, is it possible that perhaps there should be open tender processes? And if this is a possibility, why hasn't it happened up to now?
Well, this is actually what the circular that the department issued in 2016 already calls for. It calls for open, transparent tender processes. It calls for, as my colleague here was saying, not these evergreen contracts, but periodical contracts, and to allow other players to be able to bid for those tenders or for those contracts, so to speak, and to really not use the school uniform as an inhibitor to access, because that's really what it becomes when we have a situation where we can access free schooling there's school fee exemptions and so on and so forth, but then the school uniform itself comes to 2,500, 3,000 rand, and that in itself becomes a barrier to entry for some learners. So this is obviously something that we're very concerned about, and the National Education Collaboration Trust hosted a very fruitful dialogue today with all stakeholders, including the Competition Commission, teacher unions, as well as the Principals Association, and a large number of other organizations, especially and most importantly, school governing bodies. And would really like to invite the Competition Commission. We're having school governing body elections in March. It's such an important process and part of our education system, and we think that it's important that they maybe conduct some workshops or training around this issue for our incumbent school governing bodies.
Yeah, and speaking of school governing bodies, we have the National Association of SGB General Secretary Matakanya over the phone line. Thank you so much for joining us in this very important conversation. I'm sure you're aware of the Competition Commission probe. What do you make of it? Have you been part of the consultations in this probe, and have you given your submissions?
Good afternoon, Audrey, and all the listeners. It is true that we have this challenge in our schools. And firstly, as National Association of School Governing Bodies, we would like to say we don't have anything in terms of no problem against the uniform in the schools. We encourage that our children must have the uniform, but the uniform must be accessible to all the parents, and so that now uniform is not going to be used as an obstacle against our children accessing education, and not only education, quality education for all our children. So we encourage that we will forever support our children to wear uniform, because it's the pride of the school, and they were able to quickly to identify the children. However, we are strongly opposed to the uniform cartel, to this exclusive contract, and that have been signed in, and we don't know who signed those contracts, because it is true that the question of the contract in the school is the competence of the school governing bodies, and we don't see the school governing bodies signing this contract, exclusive contract, against their own children. So there's some other people who are benefiting out of this contract, and we have to say, and we told the Competition Commission that I think one of the issues that they have to investigate, because we have to lodge a complaint again to the Complaint Commission, that now we want to know who is signing this contract on behalf of the school government body exclusively, because we don't want to see a contract that has been signed some 100 years ago, because the law indicates very clearly that the school governing body cannot sign a contract that exceeds their term of office. So when you talk these things, then they exceed now the term of office of the school governing bodies. And who is really doing that?
Yes, absolutely. And those are some of the issues that have been unearthed by the Competition Commission as the probe goes on. I understand they're about to wrap it up now. But let's get a perspective from some of our viewers. We have Cynthia from Cape Town joining us over the phone line. Good evening to you.
Hello.
Hello, Cynthia. Go ahead.
Hi, ma'am. Look, I don't have much to say, but the uniform of the children is expensive, right? And another thing is this, it's not even a good quality. Within 6 months, a child is wearing like a T-shirt, because my granddaughter, she wears a T-shirt, okay, with a collar. And then, by the pocket of the badge, it tears out. And I don't know what kind of material is that. You understand? That is not fair for us parents. I'm the granny, and my daughter, she's a single mother.
Well, Cynthia, thank you for giving us, your take. Parents are not even getting value for money. You get cheap uniforms that are charged at exorbitant prices. We also have Lloyd on the phone line. Good evening to you.
Good evening. This thing of uniform has been a problem long coming. Because even sometimes you find even the teachers are starting to victimize the children in the class to say, where did you buy this uniform? Even the SGP members, when they move from their term, they will hand over to other SGP members to say, but whatever happens this is the good supply that we use in the school. And they will always push that thing to say, everyone must look at the same at the school. But someone else must be benefit from this thing. And I got transferred at work, I'm going to another school. I can't sell that uniform to another school. I must go and buy another uniform from another school.
Yeah, Lloyd, thank you for giving us, for sharing your experience with us. Just coming back into studio, is there perhaps some complexities that we're not aware of, or perhaps the Competition Commission is not aware of when it comes to the supply of uniform and, identifying an outlet that will be able to give you the kind of quality that you want? Should we have a generic uniform for all the students, and perhaps you buy the certain branding for each school, afterwards?
In actual fact, Audrey, that is what the circular that was released by the DBE also speaks to. It says that the uniforms must be as generic as possible. Of course, it will be impossible to have a completely a generic of that nature. There will be an element of customization there and there. But then that is what it says. It says that it must be as generic as possible so that you can be able to have multiple suppliers, potential suppliers. A parent must be able to make a choice. I mean, you hear some of the callers here complaining even about the quality, but then that is bound to happen. It is inevitable in an environment whereby you only have got an exclusive contract agreement with a particular supplier. I mean, to be honest with you, it's actually corruption. That is how we must put it. It is very, very clear. So there is indeed an element of complexities, but it is all related to the fact that there is unwillingness, deliberately so, to implement what should be done. In this case, in particular, is what the circular says. The circular is very, very clear of 2016. It gives clear guidelines on how we should go about the procurement of uniforms, the fact that parents must have the right to choose, the fact that there must be multiple suppliers, the fact that there must be open bidding processes, and the fact that there must be limited contracts. The representative from the NSGP was even saying that you've got contracts which will be transferred from one SGP term to the next. Now you ask yourself, why is the contract not necessarily linked to the term, if that's the case, of that particular SGP? So it tells you that indeed there certainly is a lot of anomalies.
So the guidelines have been set. It's just a matter of the will to make sure that they implement it. I'll come to you in a few minutes. We just need to take our other caller that's on the phone line, Christina from Rudaport. Welcome.
Hi. Yes, I have two questions. Firstly is, why can they not have the same uniform for all schools, just change the school badge on the clothing, for instance, which would work out much cheaper for parents. As you leave from this school to the next, you have your uniform, a matter of taking off the badge and replace it with another school badge, number one. People with, that draw SASA, for instance, having more than one child, they cannot afford those school clothing. It's really ridiculous. You have a set of summer clothes, you have a set of winter uniforms in form of tracksuit, and then most schools still have a sport uniform as well. How can a person earning 1,500 afford 3 different uniform sets for 2 or more children.
Christina, you raise a very valid point. Thank you so much for giving us your view there. Troy, this is what we've been talking about, the issue of branding. Should we go generic to start with, and then, you specifically find the branding for your school? Should be a badge or a blazer, thereafter?
So this is really some of the discussions that took place today at the NECT Dialogue. And it's one of the things that came out very strongly was that the need for a school uniform is there. Everyone broadly agreed that we need school uniforms, because there was at one point a discussion about abolishing school uniforms completely. But, school uniforms are an equalizer in many ways. They instill a sense of school pride and discipline. So the general consensus was that we need to have school uniforms. But like Molani has said, is that there needs to be that generic tonality in the school uniforms. There needs to be options for parents if they can afford a uniform at, for example, a budget outlet as opposed to the school thrift shop. They need to have that option to do that, and it needs to be as generic as possible. And perhaps the school tie and the school badge, which can be interchangeable between schools. And quality is also an important factor. Parents need to be able to shop for the best quality for the budget that they have. In many cases, you'll find that if there's multiple siblings in a family, school uniforms need to be of such a good quality that they can even be passed down.
Handed down
to especially items like the more expensive items like the school blazer, like the school tracksuits, and also this winter uniform, summer uniform. That was something that did also come up in the discussions, and it just becomes a bit too much for parents. And this is why this circular actually speaks to all of these issues. It really addresses all of these issues, and we need to work now on ensuring that schools actually implement this. And we think that the upcoming school governing body elections is a great opportunity. It's a fresh start for fresh SGBs to really look at the school uniform requirements that these schools require, and look at perhaps if they need to make some changes to make it more accessible and more affordable for parents.
So I suppose going forward, the question is, how do we get this implemented? And perhaps, Matakan, you'll be able to respond that to us in just a few minutes. I just want to take more viewers who are interested in sharing their experiences with us. Joy from Klerksdorp, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Audrey. I share the same sentiments with Christine from Rodiport. Really, it's...
Joy, are you still with us? We seem to have lost Joy there. I understand we have Mashanduka from KwaZulu-Natal, where we try to get Joy back on the phone line. We're not getting much joy with that phone line. We'll try and get a hold of our viewers once we establish a better line. Matakanya, I'll come back to you. How do we implement this? Is it a circular that was finalized? It appears the guidelines are there. It has been sorted out. How do we make sure that SGBs comply to these regulations?
Well, guidelines in general terms, well, it's not a law. It's just a guide. And people who make policies are school governing bodies. Well, it's just a guide to then consider these areas. But I think as a collective, school governing bodies and community parents and all, we firstly have to fight monopolies, because there are cartels in schools. We have to fight against that. And secondly, I think the school government must ensure that now, this is also a big industry that could enable the school communities to create employment around their schools, around their communities, and all those things. But we're saying the uniform must be affordable. It must be really affordable. And as you asked, how can we go forward? But we are just saying, is the competency of the school government bodies. They must make policies and policies that will ensure that now uniforms are affordable. But I think and realize that now the question of the uniform industry is a big issue. So how do we also create employment among our people? And that should not be used as a barrier to discourage our children from accessing education, because somebody was saying even teachers then they start saying, why don't you buy uniform and all those things. I mean, question of uniform, if it is affordable, I think we can also bring the Department of Education into the picture and start debating question of saying, now that in schools you know that there are quintile 1, quintile 2, quintile 3, and those are low-fee schools. But now, how do you assist those children in those schools so that they must be able to identify that these are the school children? How do you, because in some instances the Department of Education is intervening in terms of feeding these children who are in those. Then we can do the same. If then we establish laws, formulate laws that will assist these children, then the department will also come in, and as they do with the nutrition in schools, they can do it also with the uniform in schools. How do they support these children to access uniform, so that now uniform should not be used as a barrier to stop our children from accessing.
Right, just bringing back the conversation into Studio Troy, I see you want to respond to that point.
Yes, I thought that was quite a good point, and something that we also need to take into consideration, that, and is also something that has been discussed around this issue, is really empowering the community around the school as well. If there's someone in the community who is a seamstress, who's able to sew, what is stopping them from being able to get the pattern that is required and to start producing those school uniforms and supplying that school as well, as long as they get the school colors right and it conforms to the conscripts of the uniform? What is stopping them from being able to produce and supply for the school as well, for the school community? And I think that's, if we open up this process and we're not conscriptive about who is allowed to supply the particular uniform, it can really also empower communities around the school and promote economic activity as well. We've seen it work with the school nutrition program. It's been hugely effective, where instead of getting major corporate suppliers, we've gone and empowered communities around the school to actually supply nutrition. And because they have an invested interest in that school, you'll find that the meals are much more nutritious and healthier, and it really has been a hugely successful program.
Right. So there has to be a way to be able to regulate SGBs to make sure they, there's some kind of level playing field when it comes to the supply of school uniforms. But who's going to police them? I mean, the Competition Commission is involved now. Who's going to protect these parents that seem to be getting ripped off every time the school term starts or the school year starts?
Well, for starters, Audrey, what we need, Troy mentioned something very, very important at the beginning of this interview, that perhaps we also need to look into the kind of training that SGPs are actually exposed to. I mean, the very fact that you'll be having SGP elections soon, we'll be having new collectives across the country is an opportunity as well. I mean, that is when then we really need to emphasize on training around corporate governance. That is when we need the competition commission as well to come into the picture and assist us, let the SGPs know their rights and responsibilities. Because some of them really, they just sort of blindly carry over contracts from previous terms without even necessarily questioning it or even knowing
and there's
what rights.
Absolutely no consequences.
Absolutely, with no consequences as well. But then consequences, that is very, very important. That is why we are saying as such that perhaps there needs to be a level of a punitive deterrent action that can be taken against those who actually connive and collude around the issue of procurement of uniforms.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much to my guests here in studio for joining in the conversation. Also on the phone line from the National Association of School Governing Bodies, General Secretary Matakanya. In studio, Troy Martins, Basic Education Spokesperson, Golani Fakude, Secretariat Officer. To you, our viewers, for phoning in and sharing your stories with us. It's time for a short break. To stay with us here on ANN 7 Prime.